We'd like to welcome you back to our discussions about the book of Genesis. As you know, we're not doing a very in-depth study, word by word, or commentary on the book of Genesis. We are looking at some key points that are good for our spiritual lives. So if you remember last session, we ended chapter 13, and now we are into chapter 14 of Genesis. I can honestly tell you, when I was preparing the slides for this study, I was stuck. I honestly got stuck. Not that I don't know what the subject is, but I was stuck because I was awe-stricken by the greatness of this chapter. This chapter is something that I think we should all go back to it as many times as we can and prayerfully read this chapter and then try to understand what is it that at these very early stages in human history, God is telling us about everything that's ahead in eternity. One thing that I can tell you interesting about the Bible, and the pastor has mentioned this many times, is the principle of first mention. How many of you have heard this expression, principle of first mention? In other words, whatever is mentioned the first time, it kind of sets the tone and the pattern for the future. But I want to tell you about another principle, the principle of last mention. That is true. There is also a last mention. But the interesting thing is that whatever you read at the end, the way God works is that He actually shows us the end in the beginning. That's very interesting. I discovered that God is not playing a game with us to keep us waiting and waiting. He actually shows the end in the beginning by patterns. So you can see what the end is going to be through these stories. It's not just the first time you see it, but actually it is the last result of what God will be doing. So when you go all the way to Revelation, you would see more details about it. For instance, as an example, in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, you see the tree of life. It shows you that there is a tree in that blessed environment called the tree of life. But God doesn't give us much explanation. He just says He planted the tree of life there. But that's the end also. It's not just the beginning, because when you go to Revelation, you see in the heavenly Jerusalem the tree of life there. But in Revelation, He gives you a very detailed explanation of what this tree was. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. The fruit is every month renewed. And everything about the tree of life that you didn't know in Genesis, now you know it in Revelation. But the end is always shown in the beginning. So in the life of Abraham, we will also see the end in the beginning. And that's the amazing thing. Now, I know this is my dad's, our pastor's favorite, probably one of the favorite subjects. And he has spoken about it. We may have listened to it and we may have remembered parts of it, but I think we really, as a church, need to put a lot of time in going back and listening to whatever messages are related to this. And maybe he will cover in future messages as well. And that's about Melchizedek. That's chapter 14 of Genesis. The Melchizedek is actually the end, but it's shown in the beginning. So I was reading Genesis 14 and preparing the slides, and I was literally stuck. I didn't know how I'm going to present this to you. So I'll do some briefings on it rather than detailed explanation. So with that in mind, let's look at the slides. So our slide number 1 is Genesis chapter 14. This chapter begins with 4 kings waging war against 5 near the Dead Sea. So there is a war that's going to happen between 4 kings and 5 kings. Is there a significance to these numbers? Maybe there is. Number 4 is a number of natural. 5 is a number of grace. So I guess the natural fights the grace of God, but I won't read too much into these numbers. Sometimes we get too stuck on them. But 4 kings versus 5, they're going to fight. And where is Lot? the nephew of Abraham, he's part of the five. He lives in one of the cities of the five. So 4 kings come from the Iraq of today, northern part of Iraq and western part of Iraq. They come attack the Jordan Valley, which is the 5 kings. So that's where you can imagine on the map where these things are going to happen. The war is happening close to where Lot and his family live in Sodom. You remember in chapter 13, when Abraham and Lot, they separated their ways. Abraham stayed where he was around Hebron on the hilltops, and Lot went down into the valley of Jordan. He looked at it and he said, wow, what a beautiful area this is. Well, I might as well take all my flocks and go to that area. And there are 2 big cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And it looks like very civilized, looks like very modern, looks like everything that anyone would ever desire. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to live there. And you would read in chapter 13 that he went and he pitched his tent just by the gates of Sodom. Later on in chapter 18 and 19, you will see that Lot is not at the gates of Sodom. He's actually inside of Sodom. And not only he's just a nomad living by Sodom, now he's actually an official judge. So he's completely entangled and involved with the civic affairs of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he's one of the main celebrities or officials of the city. And it all started with looking down, going down, getting closer, and then you're pushed in at some point. You get completely entangled. So the 4 kings against 5. Now, I just see 3 dots there. It means that there was part of the verse that I did not mention. I just came all the way to the verse from 9 to 12, because if I was to show you the rest of the verses, there are a lot of names, and at this point, I don't want to go through these names. It's hard even to pronounce them to begin with. So the verse goes all the way to the end of the verse that says 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Sodom was full of tar pits. We know that it is close to the Dead Sea because in that area they found a lot of mines, sulfur mines, and also some residue of oil. So, and they fell into, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell into them. That's interesting. They're running away. They're actually losing the war. The 5 are losing against 4. And the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot is a citizen, they run with their horses probably, and they fall into these pits of tar. But those who survived fled to the hill country. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. So the enemy comes, takes everything that these guys left behind. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. So the way the Bible comments on it in chapter 13 says he pitched his tent near the gate of Sodom. Now in 14, he's already in Sodom. And by the time you get to 18 and 19, he's actually a judge in Sodom. So he's getting promoted in Sodom, but that's not necessarily a good thing to be promoted in Sodom. You want to keep away from that place as much as possible. It's interesting, in the New Testament, the world is called Sodom. The apostles, John in book of Revelation calls the world Sodom. So if you take this lesson and say to yourself, well, first, he looks, he likes it. Secondly, he moves closer. Thirdly, he is in it. And fourthly, he's already fully entangled. And this is what happens to a believer. This story is not for unbelievers. They're already residents of this world. They're living in Sodom from the day they're born. But for us, it's a cautionary word that if you start living by your impulses of your soul, your senses, not by the Spirit, by the flesh, you will always like Sodom, because the flesh likes Sodom. Spirit doesn't like Sodom. Flesh likes Sodom. Our spirit is always in love with the Lord. That's no question. I'm not here to judge anyone's spirit. You all love the Lord in the spirit. But the soul is a different issue. We may start to look and be drawn and drawn and drawn, and sooner or later you find yourself in complete entanglement and captivity and part of the society. So John is actually cautioning in the book of Revelation about Sodom, that Sodom is actually a type of the world. So he's living now in Sodom, and Lot, I'm going back now. In chapter 13 of Genesis, we want to know why Lot did what he did. Maybe we didn't pay attention. So I've gone back to chapter 13, verse 10 and 11. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of Jordan that was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord. It looked like paradise. It was so beautiful. I'm sure Sodom and Gomorrah are very beautiful cities. I mean, we want to downplay, oh, no, it was just a dump. It wasn't a dump. It was a beautiful, beautifully constructed city. Like the land of Egypt, which means extremely advanced and civilized, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. In other words, he kept moving away and away and away. So I brought these verses back because I wanted to talk about choosing by sight. You remember last time also I said Lot chose by sight, Abraham chose by faith. He had learned his lesson once in the principle of contradiction, because when he came to the land, it was all a famine, dry, and he made the wrong choice, ended up in Egypt, getting severely disciplined, and came back. And next time, he did not make that mistake. He chose by faith. Faith means, based on Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, evidence of things not seen. And faith is substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Didn't look. He closed his eyes and says, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to choose based on how it looks. I'm going to choose based on what he says. That's the lesson we need to learn, especially younger people. Your lives, you have to make so many decisions in your life. We're no exception, but nevertheless, our younger generation are in a situation, and more so nowadays, the world is demanding decisions to be made, that these decisions could be very vital and life-changing if the wrong decision is made. So keep that in mind. We live by faith, not by sight. We need to ask the Lord to sharpen our spiritual eyes so we can see things beyond what they appear to be. Don't be fooled by what you see. Ask yourself, what is behind what I'm looking at? You know, the famous chess players in the world are people that can predict 10 to 15 moves ahead as to what the enemy is going to play. And therefore, they're not caught off guard. They know exactly what the next game is going to be. And our young people and all of us, we need to be able to predict by certainty. And how do we predict? By knowing the Lord through His Word, what the enemy is planning to do. Many times you see in the Bible, there are people who knew exactly what the enemy is going to do. One of them was Elisha. Elisha had an idea what the enemy is going to do next. His servant, Gehazi, was always panicking, saying, oh God, we're going to be destroyed. But Elisha already had seen the next moves. So our young people need to sharpen their spiritual sight, as well as all of us, to be able to see what's behind, what's beyond. And that's what Abraham did. And that's why Abraham passed that test. So, when we choose by human measurements and moved eastward, meaning away from God, God's will and purpose, there may be a period of prosperity and success. Lot, for a while, probably was very, very happy. He bought homes, he sold homes, he built his life. He no longer was living in tents. Apparently, he was now living in a house. How do we know that? When the angels came to visit, he was already in a house. He had abandoned the tent lifestyle. That's one of the things that I believe the pastor also mentioned many, many years ago. You see, the nice thing is that you got to catch one or two phrases from the pastor and just remember those. It will keep you safe. One of the things that he said is tent dwelling. Now, one of the things about Abraham, which is outstanding, and he passed on this mindset to his son, Isaac, and later on to Jacob, and later on to the people of Israel, was the principle of tent dwelling. You're not supposed to live in homes. You're supposed to live in tents. And God purposely allowed the people of Israel to go through that 40 years of preparation and training, and they kept living in tents. He didn't let them, say, okay, we're going to be stuck here for 40 years. Let's build some homes and live for 40 years. No such thing. Tent dwelling is a mindset. It says that you can have all the things in the world because you worked hard and you got, success. Nobody is against success. I'm not saying don't go and work and don't make money and don't have a successful career. You do that. But in your mind, you have to live in a tent. You may be living in a $5 million mansion, but you are living in a tent in your head. Meaning that you understand that nothing in this world is permanent and you are not an owner, you're only a user. And your trust and your support and your assets and your strength does not come from your financial statement. It comes from the fact that you are in a relationship with the Lord Jesus. That is tent dwelling, where you are not stuck in and don't have deep roots in the world. You are mobile and the Lord can move you as He wishes because He knows what's best for you. So Lot had a period of prosperity, but suddenly trouble appears in the horizon and overtakes us. It always like that. I mean, in my life, I'm sure you can testify in your life, whenever we make decisions based on our mind, our perceptions, our measurements that are strictly and purely human, without consulting the Lord, without knowing what He's saying, without understanding the principles by which He works, we have a period of prosperity and success for a while. We're happy for a while. Everything is going well for a while. And all of a sudden, we have major challenge coming in our lives. And the Lord allows that because we're on the wrong track. So He needs to get us up and move us out of there, basically. So we gain much and we lose much more. So we gain a lot, but we even lose a lot more than what we gained. Every time we move towards Sodom, we gain, but we lose even more. This is the principle of Sodom. Sodom will never let you win. Sodom is a casino. You never come out a winner. You may win a couple times and you're extremely excited, but there's a saying that the house never loses. The house is always a winner. So you can invest your life with the wrong mindset and lose a lot. Jesus said, what is it that you gain the whole world and lose your soul? It's not a good trade-off to gain everything and lose the most important thing. And in the 21st century language, to lose your soul means to lose your humanity. Because the world today is actually trading your humanity with technology. The world today is taking your humanity away and giving you an amazing world of technology, but you're actually losing your humanity in the process. You're no longer human. Now you are a slave of a technology that drives you like no other time. The carnal believer will always lose in the end. A believer that's like Lot will always lose. And you're going to see the story later on. He lost his wife, he lost his wealth, he lost his integrity, he lost his honor, and not only that, he actually ended up having a horrible fruit coming out of that loss, which were two nations that became a thorn in the flesh of the people of Israel and forever in enmity with God. Then a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew, I should have highlighted that. Again, going back to the pastor, there are three words that we have in the Bible: Hebrew, Israel, Jew. And the Bible progressively starts with Hebrew, then it elevates it to Israel, and then it goes down back to a Jew. Hebrew means someone who has passed from somewhere to somewhere. A passing, a passage. So Abraham the Hebrew actually is a beautiful title. I think we should all call ourselves with a little nickname Hebrew, not the Jew, Hebrew. Because every one of us, we had a calling in our lives. God spoke to us and he said, come out. And I want to give you something. That's great. And if we make that decision to pass from where we were to where we are, we're Hebrew. We've crossed the waters. We've crossed the boundaries. We've walked now in a territory and the realm of faith rather than trust in the power of the flesh. So it's a beautiful title for Abram, Abram the Hebrew. They always knew him in that time in the land of Canaan as Abram the Hebrew. They were known as the Hebrews. Don't forget, until the Egypt time, Moses' time, they were known as Hebrews. Children of Israel, Hebrews, because they were famous that these are the people who came from that far, far away land. They crossed the Euphrates River. They came and to resettle here, so they called them Hebrews. Abraham the Hebrew, now he was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were allies with Abraham. When Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men born in his house, 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. I don't know why the Bible mentions the other individuals there that he was allies with. I guess the Bible is trying to say that he was in a very secure position. He had no threats around him. But what caught my attention is the 318 people that they were all born in his house. They were not taken from people of the land. Because I was worried, did he actually take people from the unbelievers, non-Hebrews? Well, it says there, these were all trained men born in his house. So these were all probably young men because he had not been in Canaan for too long, and therefore born in his house, they might have been older teens and early young people, young age people, that all were men of war, trained, and 318 of them went in pursuit of Lot. Abram is concerned about his nephew. So we read that in Genesis chapter 14, verse 13 and 14. He divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. You know how far he went? I mean, I'm not saying he was at the bottom of Israel of today. He was kind of in the middle somewhere. But he went all the way to Damascus. It probably was several hundred kilometers if you look at the map. So he did not quit. Abraham is not a quitter. One of the characteristics of a remnant believer, a believer who is already persuaded by calling, by vision, by faith, is you never quit. If you quit, you haven't really understood what God was after. People who are used by God are not quitters. No matter how bad things get, don't quit. You stand and you go. So he went all the way to find where the enemy was, and he took over them and he defeated them. and he brought back all the goods and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions and also the women and the people. Not only Lot was rescued, the whole bunch of people who were taken captive were also rescued. Genesis chapter 14, verse 15 and 16. So now let's take a look at lessons of Abram. Abram is now going through a new lesson. You see, last few chapters it was the principle of contradiction. You need to train his eyes. Don't look at what you see. Go beyond, go behind. Trust the Lord that he is the one who will give you the proper perspective and vision to know what you need to do. But now it's a new lesson. This time is not contradiction, it's a different lesson. See, Abraham has to learn all these lessons before he is ready to be called Father Abraham. The last few lessons had to do with the principle of contradiction and delay. Now he is being groomed to act as a priest. Abraham needs to be a priest. Again, I refer back to some of the messages from the pastor, specifically spoke about life of David. That 1 Samuel is the life of David becoming a king. 2 Samuel is the life of David becoming a priest. I conclude by saying that God's ultimate desire for his children and for his chosen vessels, those who stand on that exclusive ground of total surrender and commitment to the Lord Jesus, God wants to bring us into that experience of standing as priests. And I will show you later on in the life of Abraham how that element of priesthood is being developed in Abraham. Abraham is not just a man of faith, he's now also being groomed to act like a priest. A priest is someone who stands for God's interest and does not shy away from two things. Priest according to God's definition, not according to our ecclesiastical and religious definition. In our definitions, sometimes we think priest as someone who has a long beard, wears a certain type of garment, or they put a certain type of head covering. No. Even in the Protestant tradition, priest sometimes may mean someone who wears a specific type of collar, or you always have to wear a certain type of suit. You always have to put the Bible under your arm, and you always have to act in a certain way. But that's not the definition of priest. Priest is someone who is standing for God's interests and does not shy away from two things. A priest always forgives personally, and a priest always intercedes. A priest cannot hold any grudge against anyone. If you look at the life of David, when David came to that point of his priesthood, he had absolutely nothing against anyone. He had forgiven his enemies, Saul, his other enemies. In David's heart, there was no grudge. Even the people who assaulted him, even people who insulted him, everyone, he had said, no, I am forgiving them. That's one of the lessons of coming into that priesthood that God wants for us, to be able, by God's grace, by God's power, to forgive. Cannot act as a priest because you are representing God's interest. And God's interest is to forgive. And a priest intercedes. The call of a Christian who is called to stand as a priest of the Lord must learn to forgive. That's why Jesus, so many times in the New Testament, counsels his disciples to learn to forgive. Unless you forgive others, you shall not be forgiven. Abraham could have held a grudge in his heart against Lot. Lot caused a division in the clan, weakening of the family because they were not united anymore. There were less of them. Could have many reasons why Lot was such a bad boy. But he forgave him because he went after rescuing his nephew. A Christian must also intercede, especially for his brothers and sisters. My brothers and sisters, we are here to say something very clear to all of us. We as a church not only need to forgive, but we need to intercede. We need to pray for those people who we know, whether our family members, whether our friends, whether members that are not here anymore, to pray, to forgive them, and to intercede for them, that the Lord may continue to work in their lives in the ways He finds fit. A Christian must also intercede for his brothers and sisters. Jesus demonstrated this principle when He died on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. He not only forgave, but He was actually interceding. And that shows the priesthood of our Lord Jesus, even on the cross. Call of a Christian must attain to his calling as a priest. The calling requires us to go through circumstances to learn what we should do, forgive and to intercede. And you're going to see from this point on, Abraham begins to intercede. That's one of the outstanding characters of Abraham. He learned his lesson with Lot at this particular juncture in chapter 14. Up to that point, Abraham has other challenges in his life. He doesn't know how to make decisions. He doesn't know how to hear God's voice, but he learned his lesson through the principle of contradiction. Now God says, you learned your lesson, you passed, you got your A+, now I'm going to teach you the lesson of being a priest so that you can forgive and intercede. And this is what God wants in our lives, to learn to forgive and to intercede. On the surface, the story is about the 4 kings and the 5 kings. When you read the story, it's all about Lot. Actually, the whole story is about Abraham. That's where it caught me last night when I was preparing the slides, that this story is not really about Lot and the 4 kings and the 5 kings. That's on the surface. The real lesson in this chapter is about that man called Abraham that needs to learn something that is going to stay with him for the rest of his life. And sometimes you look at the surface of your life, the circumstances of your life, and you say, wow, I got the 4 kings and the 5 kings, I got this, I got that, I got this challenge, that challenge. But that's all the surface. Go underneath and look what God is trying to do. He's trying to train you to become a priest. That's the calling of the church. In book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse, I think, 6, it says, He called us as kings and priests. We all love the part of the king because that means power and ruling and ordering and commanding. But the priest is where God really wants the heart of a believer to be oriented. So it's all about Abraham, this chapter, not about Lot. That's just a surface story. Recovering the captives, the 5 kings were not able to defeat the 4 kings, but Abraham defeats it with 318. That's the funny thing. I don't know how many thousand people were involved in this fight from each side, but Abraham takes over the 4 kings with 318, where the 5 kings could not. That's the power of resurrection, power of faith, that with a very little that we have, we can stand and we can win. We don't need big, we need to have faith. We don't need big, we need to have the right one with us. And the Lord was with Abraham, and He brought defeat to 4 kings. He goes to Damascus to recover the captives. How far are we willing to go to recover the captive brothers and sisters? How far are we willing to go to intercede for our loved ones? How many times you've been on your knees and praying and begging God to forgive and to bring your loved ones who are not yet in line with the plan and purpose of God to come and to enter that plan and purpose. The distance we journey is not horizontal move, as Abraham did. In Abraham's case, he went straight from one location to the other location. But our moving to Damascus is not a horizontal move, it's a vertical move into the heavenly realms where the enemy has taken the brothers and sisters captive. You know, every time someone in our family, our friends, our people in our lives who are in some ways captive, it's because in the heavenly realm there is a captivity. The enemy has taken something of these people. So we need to journey not horizontally but vertically, go up in prayer, in understanding the mind of God and begin to seriously intercede and fight the enemy on our knees in prayer, in unity, in forgiveness and intercession, so that those people are going to be released from the hold of the enemy in that heavenly Damascus, not the earthly one. Are we willing to go? Abram recovers his nephew Lot, his family and belongings. He has learned the importance of intercession. I think one of the things we as a church need to learn and learn more, intercession. For our own people and for everyone here to continue to intercede, He will intercede for others a few more times. You know, at least I remember 3 other times that Abraham interceded. This is the first time he went out there and he recovered his nephew. 3 other times I remember that he interceded. He interceded for his son Ishmael. Yes, Ishmael was not the chosen son. Ishmael was not the chosen vessel, but he was his son. And when he had to let go of Ishmael and Hagar, you remember, he went to the Lord and says, are you going to take care of this son? Are you going to do something for him? Are they going to die? Can you please do something to keep this son as well? And the Lord promised Abraham that he will take care of Ishmael. Ishmael is not going to be lost. He interceded one more time for his nephew Lot later on, when this time God was going to judge Sodom and Gomorrah. He stood and actually bargained with God over the numbers. If there are 50, would you destroy the city? He said, by myself I swear, if there are 50 righteous, I will not. And he bargained down. I think that's the character of the family, without naming names. It's a family trait. They bargained. Got down to 10. If I can get 10 righteous people, will you judge the city? He said, by myself I swear, I will not judge. And of course, there were only 8. So he couldn't find 10. And the third time, or the fourth time, depending on how you count, for Abimelech, when he lied again in a moment of weakness that says, this is my sister, Sarah, rather than saying she's my wife. And he had to intercede and pray for the healing of the family of Abimelech. So Abraham has become an intercessor. He knows that every time there's a problem, he's got to go and ask the Lord for help. Intercession means you know where to go to get the answer. It doesn't mean that you have to have long prayers and end up on your face and, get goosebumps. If that happens, God bless you. But intercession means you know where to go to get the answer. And that is to go to the heavenly realms where the Lord's throne of grace is. In the book of Hebrews says, in time of need, we go to the throne of grace, and with boldness we stand. And that's the power of intercession. After Abraham returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom met him in the valley of Shaveh. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abraham, saying, blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth, or a tithe, of everything. That's where I got stuck. I think those few sentences, you can probably spend a year talking about what it really means in Genesis chapter 14, verse 17 to 20. So here we meet Mr. Melchizedek. Who is he? But before I get to that, if you could close your eyes and imagine, Abraham is coming back. He's already back, released all the captives. He's taken his nephew and his family. So they're happy, they're hugs and kisses. And all of a sudden you see from 2 corners, 2 men walking. He looks to the right. He looks to the left. There is a man walking. There is a man walking. Both are walking towards Abraham. I think you get goosebumps now. He's standing there, and these two men, dignified, they're walking. So he's just waiting, and the first one to arrive is the king of Sodom, and the next one to arrive, and they come and stand right next to Abraham. And they bring offers. You want to sell your house? We have 2 offers, multiple offers here. 2 offers on the table. Each offer is extremely interesting. I'm not saying exciting, because the one from Melchizedek has absolutely nothing to be excited about. It's just a tray with a little loaf of bread and a cup of wine. That's all there is. The king of Sodom has brought a list of all the things that he's going to do for you. All the goodies. You're already a selected citizen of Sodom. He probably got promoted automatically, even though Abraham didn't choose Sodom, but he automatically got honorary citizenship. But everything else that came with it, money, power, fame, everything you can imagine is on this list here. So now Abraham has to make a choice. Principle of contradiction. One more time. Which one are you going to choose? The one that looks very attractive, or the one that doesn't seem very attractive, but Abraham has learned his lesson. He's an A+ student. He has got 100 out of 100 from this point on. There is absolutely no doubt Abraham is not going to go for what he sees. He's going to go for what God constantly tells him by revelation. So, Mr. Melchizedek has arrived. Who is he? And this is where I struggled, because this in itself, I know the pastor attempted to do a conference on Melchizedek, and he probably needs to do some more before we get total hang of it. But I'll just give you a few pointers. In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 1 to 3, we find the answers to who this man was. Because you remember I said he always shows the end in the beginning, but when you go to the end, you see all the details. Well, Hebrew is the end, explaining to us really who this man was. In Genesis 14, you only hear him come and give the wine and the bread. But this is who he is. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham apportioned a tenth or tithe, a part of the spoils, was first of all by translation of his name. In other words, what does the word Melchizedek mean in Hebrew? King of righteousness, because that's Melchizedek. That Melchizedek means the king. Melch means king. Zedek comes from holy or righteousness. And then also the king of Salem, later on became Jerusalem, the city, that's where he was from, which is the king of peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God. He remains a priest perpetually. Wow. Wow. You cannot imagine the man walking there, who that man is. Wow. I wish I could have captured that moment by just standing and looking at Abraham to see what he thought of this man who's coming with a simple tray of bread and wine. But he's not just any man. So here we go to some of the things that that verse said. First of all, he's the priest of the Most High. Melchizedek was a priest of God. You may say, well, what's the big deal about it? I'll tell you, because I was studying Hebrews chapter 7 and I quit. Literally quit. Because I said, it's too much. I cannot handle this. My brain simply cannot handle. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, if tonight or next few days, just go and read Hebrews chapter 7, not once, 10 times back to back, and to see what the Lord is going to say to you in Hebrews chapter 7. In Abraham's time, priesthood was God appointing his priests, as opposed to other nations when they appointed their priests. In the case of Abraham, it says he was the priest of God, not priest unto God. Do you see the difference? I'll tell you where the difference is. The priest unto God means we have chosen a priest and sent him in to talk to God. You remember when that happened? During the Mosaic time. The Mosaic time, the priests were chosen by a certain tribe, and one of them was chosen as high priest, sent in. They were priests unto God on behalf of people. Whereas in this case, the priest is the priest of God, means God has sent his priest to come and visit. That's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. God has a priest. Did you know that the Trinity has the makeup of a priest within the Trinity? I want you to understand what the Trinity is. There is an element of priesthood in the Trinity. And that element became flesh, and then was put to death as an offering, raised as an offering, wave offering, and then ascended back and remained that same priest. Christ was not a priest that when he arrived in heaven, he became the priest and the title. He was priest forever. Even before there was a creation, the second person of Trinity was already the priest of God. In other words, everything for the purposes of God was executed for the pleasures of God by this element. Without the Son, God would not move. Without the Son, God would not do anything. Without the Son, God would not speak anything. God did everything, channeled everything, did everything because of that second person of Trinity. We call him the Son. In the eternal past, it's called the Word. But he was a priest forever, from eternity past to eternity future. In Abraham's time, the priesthood was God appointing his priests. In the time of Moses, the priests were appointed to represent man. Priest unto God, priest of God. A little word makes a huge difference, and that is the superiority of the Abrahamic covenant compared to Mosaic covenant. I told you last time there are 8 covenants in the Bible, and the greatest of all in the Old Testament is the Abrahamic covenant. And the greatest of all in the New Testament is the New Covenant. And these two stand as two Everests, one in the Old, one in the New. And in between is all these highways and the bridges built by the other covenants. The Mosaic covenant needed priests on behalf of men to enter God's presence. In the case of Abraham, God has entered time and space to meet with Abraham. Abraham is also being trained to be God's priest, not man's priest. He is going to be God's priest because the model by which he was trained, the model that he saw, was only one model, and that was Melchizedek. He's going to be in the order of Melchizedek. And I'll tell you this, believers and the church of Jesus Christ is called to be conformed in that element of priesthood in the order of Melchizedek. We are not pursuing Aaronic priesthood. And here's where the error of the church is. Many churches and maybe traditional denominations, the priests are not in the order of Melchizedek. They are in the Aaronic order because they're offering sacrifices and doing things that wants to please God, whereas God's priest has already pleased him. He's now here to execute a certain mission. Big difference. priest of the Most High. Melchizedek's position of priest and God. He's not localized to specific race or time. If he said, you are the priest of Jehovah, he would have been limited to the name Jehovah, which is a time-limited title. That's what it really upsets me, where Christians today are hung up on the term Jehovah even, and they're so excited about the word Jehovah, whereas that title has been already surpassed by a greater title in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the Jewish people were related to Jehovah. But because that's a specific time, a specific period, a specific dispensation, but when we come into the New Testament, Jehovah is no longer the God of nations, because Jehovah is the God of Israel, whereas in New Testament, God wants to be the God of all nations, and therefore he has to go even farther higher than Jehovah. That's why he calls himself the God, the Most High, meaning everything now comes under the covering. Even Jehovah is his revelation and manifestation in a specific time in the Old Testament. We still don't have Jehovah in that very, very active sense until we come later into the Mosaic time. He's not localized to a specific race, to a specific time. He's the God Most High, means everything is now encompassed under this title. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing greater than that. We are the children of the Most High. We're not the children of Jehovah. We are the children of the Most High, which means higher than even the name Jehovah, which the people of Israel so proudly held on to, and rightly so. It was theirs. We are the children of the Most High. And Abraham is taught, very beginning, who is visiting. It doesn't say he was a priest of Jehovah. He was the priest of the Most High. In other words, Abraham has to come to a position where through him, all nations have to come under the blessing, because that's what it was promised to him in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Not only a specific seed that is coming from your flesh, that is going to be Isaac and Jacob and the children of Israel. Everyone has to come under this covering. He is the priest of God Most High. He is a king and priest. Melchizedek is a king and priest. So, he's the king of Salem, means peace. He's the Melchizedek, king of righteousness. It's interesting, when we become a Christian, we are first brought under the governance of King of Salem. God gives us peace. We are reconciled. We are at peace with God. No more fighting. But then, after we are brought under the governance of King of Salem, now says, I need to become the Melchizedek in your life, meaning my righteousness has to be imparted to you and brought into full manifestation in your life. Without father and mother means his life cannot be traced to human origin. He remains a priest perpetually by having neither beginning of days nor end of time, end of life, which means this particular priest, who has taken appearance of a man, has his model from another priest, which is the heavenly, the eternal priest. From eternity past to eternity future, Trinity has a priesthood element. This man is the appearance of that element on earth for that particular time in visiting Abraham. I'm almost there, because I think we have a lot of things to cover in this chapter 14. There are two terms in theology called Theophany and Christophany. You would maybe hear it from time to time. Theophany and Christophany. Theophany means the appearance of God. Theo is God in Greek, and phany means to appear. Christophany means Christ appearing. So the Father or the Son, or Father and the Son, sometimes appear in the form of an angel or human in the Old Testament. There are times that God the Father has also appeared in a form of an angel or a human, but typically, generally, it is a Christophany. Christ has appeared many times in the Old Testament as a human or as an angel. So, of course, this is not the same as incarnation. Jesus of Nazareth was never incarnated in the Old Testament. Second person of Trinity, or the Son, appeared in a form of a human, but that was only an appearance. Incarnation means full flesh and body, permanently, forever. The second person of Trinity takes the form of a man, becomes man. Every fiber of his being is now man and divine together forever. That's incarnation. It was more likely Christ appearing in a human form as God's eternal priest to Abraham. So who was Melchizedek? Most likely was the person of Christ, second person of Trinity, appearing as Melchizedek. Because, how do we know that? In John chapter 8, verse 56, Jesus refers by saying, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and he was glad. What did Abraham see that he was glad? He saw the person of the Son, except he saw him in different forms. Several times he saw him. That one time, Melchizedek. Next time, he's going to see him in the three angels that are going to come, and one of them was the Lord there. And most likely, again, the person of the Son who was visiting. So Melchizedek, when did Melchizedek appear? When Abraham acted in faith and obedience to and entered warfare with God's enemies. When we live by faith and act in obedience, Melchizedek appears. I don't know if you got the point. You want to see Christ? You want to have a revelation of Christ? You've got to live by faith and obey the command that faith brings in our lives, the movement that faith asks us to step out in faith. When we step out in faith and we obey the voice of the Spirit in our lives and we start progressing, that's when Melchizedek comes. And the other thing is, we have to be engaged in warfare for Melchizedek to come. Melchizedek didn't just appear because, Abraham was having a good time. Abraham had fought a fight, was tired, had gained a victory. He had a lot of reasons to be thankful, and at that moment, Melchizedek appears. This goes to the principle of tithing. We ask people in this church to tithe. Tithing is not because it's an order for you to write a check. When you tithe, you're declaring that you've been in a fight and you've won it. When you write that check, you're saying, I was in a fight, I was in a war, and God gave me victory, and I have met Melchizedek. From now on, don't give a tithe unless you know that God has met you in your life and you have had the victory. Give the tithe of that. You don't give a tithe because it's a religious command like the Old Testament. You give a tithe because you're declaring that I was engaged in a warfare and God gave me victory and I have met Melchizedek. Because Melchizedek pronounced a blessing on Abraham that stands eternally in the life of Abraham. You want God to pronounce a blessing in your life that stands forever? That's when the tithe is given. Next time you want to give your tithe, you want to write that check. First, thank God that you had victory. You're not writing that check in defeat. You're writing that check in victory, that God has given you victory and you have already met Melchizedek. And the Melchizedek has pronounced his blessing upon you. That's the attitude of giving. That's how we give. It's not an obligation. It is an honor to do that. Abraham gave because it was an honor for Melchizedek to have come all the way, the king of Salem, to come. Why did king of Salem come all the way to meet this man? He knew the answers. When we enter into spiritual warfare, our Melchizedek appears. You don't want to fight? No Melchizedek in Revelation to you. You don't want to get on your knees? You don't want to stand for God's interest? Why would you expect Melchizedek to pay you a visit? Keep your money to yourself. Because you haven't met Melchizedek, there's no victory in your life. That money is not going to be blessed. The money that's blessed is because we have understood what God is after and we stand for that. And when we gain the victory, Melchizedek appears and says, good job. And I gladly give what I have to give. Why did Melchizedek appear? To strengthen us, or he appears to us, and to assure us that he has blessed us. When Jesus appears to us, he's always coming to strengthen us. Even in rebuke, he strengthens us. Even in everything that he does, he strengthens us, and then he says, I have blessed you. Do you think God comes not to bless us? Do you think God would ever appear in our lives not to bless? The very appearance itself is a blessing. The very revelation of Jesus in our lives is a blessing. Possessor of heaven and earth. Interesting. Abraham had never possessed anything in heaven. He had only gone to Damascus and got his nephew. But, see, Melchizedek sees it much greater, says, you are the possessor of heaven and earth. Not an only earthly, but heavenly. Abraham fought on this earth and gained both heaven and earth. My brothers and sisters, you want to gain heaven and earth? Start fighting. Start standing. Start committing your lives to stand for the interests of God and His kingdom. And not only in this life you will have the blessing that the Lord will have in your life, but you will also be the possessor of heaven, meaning you will be qualified and worthy of ruling and reigning with Jesus Christ. When we stand for God's interest, we gain victory here. And when His kingdom takes possession of everything, we will be in that victory as well. Blessed be God Most High. So we already covered two of those sentences. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Now it says, blessed be God Most High. Twice he mentions God Most High. Melchizedek is Christ in Christophany because he blesses God. You see, we know he's Christ because he actually blesses God. He didn't bless himself, so he blessed me. He says, blessed be God Most High, which means that man standing there is the person of Christ, blessing in type what he did for his father later on. God could not bless himself. Christ's priesthood blesses both sides. So nice. He blesses Abraham, he blesses God. The first sentence says, blessed be Abraham of God Most High. Now he turns around and says, blessed be God. You know why he's thanking? Every time Jesus does this for us, he blesses us and he turns around and says, bless you, Father. As much as the Father is blessing the Son turns around and blesses the Father. I think in heaven, if we just right now pull the curtain, we'll see Father and Son constantly blessing each other. The Father says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am pleased. And the Son turns around and says, blessed be my Father. It's a perpetual blessing. Because Trinity is all about blessing. Christ comes to Abraham and Melchizedek comes to Abraham and says, you're blessed. You're going to have the earth and heaven is going to be yours. You're going to be possessor. You're going to be having victory because you acted like a priest, just like me. He turns around and says, you are a blessed God because you made this thing happen. We are blessed, and in our victory, our testimony causes God's name and character to be blessed. Everybody in that region knew Abraham, don't mess around with him. He will have another 318 and pursue you. Don't mess around with Abraham and his family. There's an anointing on that family. Don't touch. He's going to come after you. And he made the name of God Most High well known in that area. Everybody knew Abraham, the Hebrew, is worshiping a God who has given him victory. That's why Melchizedek blesses God, says, you know what? You are blessed. Because what he did has taken your name and testified in these nations of idol worshippers that you are the God, you are the true God. The word bless in Greek is from the root eulogia, meaning speaking well. You know, when you go to a funeral, someone eulogizes, eulogy, that's the same word for blessing. Speaking well of you. And finally, the last statement is, He has given you your enemies into your hands. As we learn to bless God in our lives, through our testimony and victory over the enemy, He delivers the enemy to us. That is the secret about true worship. Melchizedek represents a priesthood from heaven and is perpetual, eternal. Mosaic priesthood represents a priesthood that was temporary and only for Israel for their need for atonement. Ended with Christ offering Himself as the final and the eternally perfect sacrifice for eternal atonement and reconciliation. That's under the Aaronic priesthood. Christ, up until the cross, Jesus Christ, up until the cross, was under the Aaronic priesthood. He was the final sacrifice of the Aaronic priesthood. All these thousands of sacrifices that were offered over 1,500 years finally came to the one last one, which is the person of God incarnate, Jesus Christ Himself. You're going to see something very interesting about Abraham. I'll just give you a preview. God shows Abraham in 3 stages the atonement and sacrifice elements. First, wine and bread. Then, in chapter 15, you're going to see animals sacrificed and lined up, and God is going to move through it. And finally, in chapter 20, you're going to see the Son sacrificed. You see, it started with inanimate, to the animals, to the Son. God is progressively showing Abraham where it's going to end. So, Jesus Christ on this earth is the last sacrifice under the Aaronic priesthood. After that, there is no more Aaronic because it's completed. So, I'm going to stop here because I was going to read chapter 7 of Hebrews completely, but that we will leave for some other time. But I'm excited because I have begun to understand a lot of things about the person of Jesus Christ and His ministry, not just as the offering of atonement which He did for us, but also now the specific ministry that He has in preparing the sons for that day when we have to enter glory. And that's only possible through the priesthood of Melchizedek, not Aaronic. Aaronic only forgives you. Jesus brought forgiveness through His sacrifice. But beyond the grave, He's now in a different priesthood, which is the preparation of the church for the kingdom that is to come and eternal glory. Amen? Amen. God bless you, Pastor.